Welcome to our broadcast. I'm your host, Michael Lange. On August 2nd, 7:30 in the morning, a young man named Chauncey Bailey was gunned down. Chauncey Bailey was the editor of the Oakland Post, also a reporter for the Oakland Tribune, and had been involved as well in television around the Bay Area community. He was gunned down in cold blood in broad daylight, and he has left a community wondering what happened. Today, we have some friends of Chauncey Bailey to tell us their experiences of him. And clearly, Chauncey Bailey was to be our guest this evening. So we want to hope that you will join in with us as we celebrate and remember Chauncey Bailey. With me is Charles Akins, who is also a reporter for the Oakland Post. Also Yasmin Michelle, who is a journalist as well. And Reverend the Reverend Keith Muhammad, who's been on the show on many, many occasions. And so we've all had some memory of Chauncey Bailey, and I thought maybe we would start about the first time when we actually met him and what we feel his essence is to us as a people. And then we will come back on a second part with co-host Jerry Lange, who will also have some more guests. So maybe, Charles, you'd like to start about your experiences with Chauncey.
It was 1973 when I first met Chauncey. I think he was a junior or senior at San Jose State, where he was a journalism student, and I was a journalism teacher at Old Merritt College, which they called Grove Street at the time. And I was teaching newspaper production, feature writing, photography, and creative writing at the time. And Chauncey would come in to audit the classes that I was teaching. And one day he came in, walked into the class, and he says, I'm at odds that whether I should go with the Daily Press or the Black Panthers. Which one would you suggest would be the best for me to get involved with? And I said, Chauncey, I've worked for the Daily Press, and it's a good experience in terms of learning how to write under pressure and that kind of thing. I like the Black Panthers for their community programs and so forth, but the law enforcement is moving on them right now, and I don't think they're going to be around very long at the rate they're being moved on. And I would suggest you get your daily newspaper experience, and then once you get it, bring it back to your community and do some good in your community. And he listened to me, and I think he joined the Detroit Free Press. And not long after that, when he graduated, he went on to Detroit, and then he worked in Washington with Gus Savage and the Hartford Courant, and in Connecticut, and United Press International. And I was amazed that this young student was moving so fast and able to get a good job and able to make good contributions for the papers that he won. And a couple of times I talked to him when he was with the Hartford Courant. I was back in New York, and I talked to him on the phone and asked him how he was doing. And I've always liked Chauncey as a person because he seemed a little less than ghetto fabulous. He was more like a sophisticated kid from Catholic school or something like that. And I say, well, he's interested in his community, and that's sort of rare for a person raised up in an environment he was raised up in. I thought but I was happy to see that someone wanted to report on the Black community. I had wanted to do it myself a few years earlier, and had returned to the Tribune after a professional baseball career. And Chauncey had a lot of admiration for me, and I had equal admiration for him as a person. And I tried to give him the advice that I thought would be best for him. And I was amazed when he returned to the community, and he wanted to work in the community. And he got the job at the Tribune, and he wasn't afraid to do the Black story.
Yeah, well, with a word like ghetto fabulous, I'm sure that Chauncey probably touched the lives of many people. And what's your memory, and what do you think the legacy of Chauncey Bailey is?
I actually am obviously saddened, but also can remember Chauncey with a smile. I met Chauncey in the early 90s at a Black Media Coalition function that Rudy Marshall would put on every year. And at the time was an aspiring journalist and was covering the beat for Cal State Hayward and was the editor of their magazine. And we, had that one conversation, and he said, if you ever need any, if you have any questions or anything, call me. Well, I did. And he made good on his promise that every time that I called him, he may answer the phone real abrupt and a little cranky, that was his way, but he totally always had the time or took the time. Not only for me, but at his farewell from the trip, many young people and aspiring journalists and up-and-coming journalists attested to that as well. And again, like I said, it was the early 90s, and he remained a mentor of mine throughout the time. I, would call him, and I can remember him telling me to, when I was first starting out, to rewrite stories, just pick a story, the New York Times, LA Times, or whatever, and just rewrite it. And, we talked about angle and rhythm of a story and those sort of things. So he certainly was a mentor to me, and I actually hadn't spoken with him since he had left. It was kind of sparingly that we had spoken, but I actually had phoned him. The Spirit moved me to phone him on Wednesday. Wow. And again, he picked up the phone, and I was so surprised because I called him at the Post, and I was totally unexpected that he answered. And because it wasn't a direct line, it was the general line, and he answered, and it was the, hello, abrupt as he can be, but he still took the time to talk to me, and I was telling him about pitched him a story, and he was like, yeah, okay, just just make it happen and just make it under 300 words, And so Thursday morning it was just unbelievable. That
this whole thing with the
this gym in
rhythm.
our community is no more, but his spirit was certainly sore. And will
You
live
mentioned
on.
the rhythm of the story, and I think that might be a good way to say it. He seemed to find out where the rhythm in so many stories. He was plugged in all across the region, literally, and he was bringing in some national experiences to some very local things. And I wanted to ask you, Minister Keith, your experience with Chauncey Bailey.
Well, I would say that my first introduction was from reading his articles in the paper, reminding me that in my childhood I was always disturbed that I couldn't find in the city paper articles about and by black people. When Minister Farrakhan toured the country before the Million Man March, he held a press conference here in the Bay Area. And I can recall being exceedingly disturbed that we didn't have in that press conference, in the major media that presented themselves, Chauncey Bailey of the Oakland Tribune. And I remember leaving that press conference upset that we had a press conference without Brother Chauncey. And even though at that point we hadn't really met, but I would later get the blessing to meet him in the black media outlet wherein he was the news director at Soul Beat Television. I would eventually be blessed to secure a show on Soul Beat as we were airing Minister Farrakhan at that point on the air, and had occasions to be interviewed by Chauncey on Soul Beat Television. So the great blessing to see him grow from a writer for the Tribune to a director for the only black television cable network in the country at the time, and then grow from that to Our TV, and then grow from that to become what he had become in the last few weeks, and that's the editor of the Post newspaper groups. And so I was really impressed to watch his growth and encouraged by the directions and the steadfastness he took in presenting the news.
What kind of an impact do we think that, I want to just show this article that It was in the morning paper on the Oakland Tribune. But I want to know what kind of effect he had, you know, on all of us in terms of, he certainly had to be objective, but there's some subjectivity in all of the objectivity. When you raise a question, one could argue that the question is subjective. But he kind of took an objective view of things. That is, he didn't, because he was an African American, that didn't give you, you know, the one leg up that you can say, oh, he's not going to be tough on me. But and there were situations, I'm sure, where he asked the often or the least asked questions. Did anybody have any experiences with that?
Michael, journalism schools teach they try to teach objectivity. That's the idea of good journalism, is to be objective, keep yourself out of the story. But the minute you ask the question, it's subjective because it comes from your questions come from your own subjective experiences. So there's no real true objectivity.
Yeah.
I used to argue that with professors at UC Berkeley. Hey, I'm asking a question, so it comes from me, so I'm the subject, and so there's what's the objectivity of that? Well, being fair, Charlie, they would say. You got to be fair, and in journalism, you be fair to triangulate the story, the left, the right, and in between, and the middle, and you talk to the different sources, and you get the different points of view. Chauncey was good at that, getting the different points of view. He would get the city official, the ghetto, the Black Panther, or the Black Muslim, and he would talk to all of them to get that side, and that made him a good, fair community journalist.
Okay, well, we were almost running out of time. I wanted to get your comment, Ms. Yasmin, and then maybe a final comment from Minister Keith.
Well, I think that certainly he was a responsible journalist, and I guess that speaks to what Charles was saying, in that you be objective and you do get different angles of a story as opposed to a framing from one angle. And I think that he brought a passion to black journalists and black journalism that is certainly unfortunately far and in between, and certainly the compassion that he brought will certainly be missed.
Okay, thank you. And your final comment?
We appreciate the power of his pen. And as the expression says, the pen is mightier than the sword. And utilizing the talents, the skills, and the ability that God blessed him with, Chauncey Bailey became a champion for news relative to the lives of our people. And while we lost him while he was doing what he loved to do. And he was on his way to write some more. And so we're taught to die not unless we die among the righteous. But you can't do that unless you live among the righteous. And we appreciate the fact that Chauncey, every time I saw him, was working to represent our interests in the news.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the guests, Charles Akins, Yasmin Michelle, and Minister Keith Muhammad. I want to thank all of you. And we're going to come back with part 2. We'll have some more guests who will remember and celebrate the life of Chauncey Bailey.
Welcome back to Oakland Is, and we're remembering Chauncey Bailey this evening. Our guest, Eddie Abrams, who's the producer of Hours TV television show, and Fred Jackson, a community organizer, and you've been at City Hall in Richmond, and you've seen him on television many times. He's also from North Richmond, and welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, we all know that Chauncey had just received that wonderful appointment as editor of the Oakland Post, and I also know that both of you knew him quite well for many, many years. Yeah. So we want to go back to when you first met him, your first impressions, and then maybe a story or two we'll tell that was personal between you and Chauncey.
Yes.
So, Eddie, where did you
Yes.
first meet Chauncey?
Well, I remember vividly. I met Chauncey. It was at the Black Repertoire Theater, actually. I was videotaping a play, and Chauncey was there. Now, I had heard about Chauncey, but I actually never met him. And he came over to the camera where I was videotaping and introduced himself. And from then on, we just hit it off because Chauncey, at that time, at that particular time, he wasn't in television at that time. I think he was writing for the Tribune. But later I was to find out when he started going through the community like I do. And you ask about Hours Hour, let me tell you, Hours is, I worked on Soul Beat. I was hosted a show on Soul Beat for like 13 years, traveling this country and African countries doing documentaries on African people to show us in the positive light that we really are. And when Chauncey had heard about me also, and we just hit it off, big time, you know. And later on, he got a television show at Soul Beat, and became he brought a big plus to Soul Beat, because he used to do the news, and he went out and got people, chose the people, interviewed the people, and had him on their team. And later he got a show on TV, and my show came on just after Chauncey. And every time I'd go down there, Chauncey was there. He'd taken his job very, very seriously, you know, and working with the people. And so that's how I met him. And then after then, he became more out in the community. I did a lot of, just about every public event that we had. I was there with my camera, and I also saw Chauncey there.
What does Hours mean?
Hours, O-U-R-S, which means One United Resource System. One United Resource System. And I came up with that when Chuck Johnson asked me to host a show, and I said, well, what shall I call it? And I wanted I wanted to cover the black community.
Yes.
You know, and tell our story, and we were relying on his story. His story didn't portray us very well in history.
Right.
And so, like, I covered the Million Man March in 1995. I interviewed over 80 people at the Million Man March. I've gone to Africa. I've done black towns here. After slavery, we had black towns. So that's what Ours is all about, to tell our story, and we were relying on his story.
Wonderful. Fred, what are your memories? How did you first meet Chauncey?
Well, actually, the first time I met Chauncey, when I was working on the Stanley Tookie Williams project.
Yes, I remember.
I'd heard of him, but I actually met him when he did a story on Stanley Tookie Williams with Barbara and I. And he interviewed both her and me. But I was impressed with him in the sense that the Stanley Tookie Williams project wasn't a real popular project. You know, it was kind of shunned, or either media would try to give the bad slant towards the story. So Barbara had to be very discriminating in who she even let do a story.
Right.
And I remember Chauncey, as the photographs that he took us out in the town, and we took these real exclusive photographs where I'm standing on the back upside of the building. You know, he wanted a contrast between me as the violence prevention person and Barbara as the writer, and, you know, the co-writer Stan's books. And I remember, I said, boy, he really taking Stan seriously. You know, to take us out in the town and have these photographs made and put us in such a positive light. And that's what I knew then. I said, now, here is a person, you know what I mean? I said, here's a guy who really cares. Here's a guy who's really can respect, because he showed that he could respect the death row conversion of Stanley Tookie Williams and his works, and he put us on the front page and put us in a unique situation. I never had someone to write such a story and to put us in that light, and I was really, I knew then that he was one to be reckoned with, that he had a mind of his own, that if he could see good, you know what I mean, that he could see a glimmer of hope, glimmer of good, then Chauncey would want to go prospecting for the greater good.
Oh, he did.
He did. He did.
You know, I thought Charles Aikens made an interesting point in the first segment of this show. He said that, you know, I was surprised by Chauncey because he was so polished. He wasn't ghetto, you know,
Right.
and he'd probably gone to Catholic school and all that. And he said, and yet he came out like a tiger, really,
Right.
about black people.
That's
And
right.
I find that unusual, even when he worked for the white press.
Right.
Yes.
You see what I mean? That's a fascinating part of him, I think.
Yes, at the Tribune. I couldn't wait to pick up the Tribune and go to see what Chauncey had written in the
Right.
Tribune, because it's always about us. He
That's right.
represented us.
He had a passion for black people. And that's that's unusual, don't you think? For the, you know, when you get the kid that is polished and everything, he wants to go over to CNN and all the stories, and then he doesn't, then he'll do a black story, but
True.
throw away a black story, you know.
You would think that.
You would think that
coming
about
where
it.
Chauncey came from.
Exactly.
He was just
from where he
opposite
came.
of that.
So I think that the fact that he was totally different, it really caught you off guard.
Yes. And Chauncey, another thing, I don't know if most people know it, he was a playwright also.
Oh, no, I didn't. know
Yeah,
that.
well, not a playwright per se. He wrote television scripts. I taped
That's
it.
good.
I taped several of them that he had written himself and directed. I don't know how far it went, but he sure was off into that also.
Right.
The man loved to write, and he could write.
And I'll tell you something else about Chauncey. He didn't forget Jonestown. Oftentimes you'd have your ups and downs on how we remember Jonestown. But every year at Jonestown, I perform a song, Let's Not Forget, that I wrote in memorials in memory of those who perished.
Right.
And every year I would see Chauncey. He would come out there. You know, he hung in there when the crowds were small, when the crowds were large. He was consistent. He really had a compassion for people. And many people kind of pushed away or disdained Jonestown or what caused the people to commit mass suicide.
That's right.
And there's many issues around, you know, the circumstances.
He
and
never ran from a
happenstances.
story.
But he didn't run from
No,
the
he
story.
didn't run from
He
the
still, he was there. You would see his face, and I would say, I remember every year I would say, thanks, Chauncey. I appreciate that. I really appreciate, you know, your concern, and he was always there.
I remember he went to Allensworth with us, and he covered, that's the first time he went to this all-black town that I put on the bus tours to Allensworth, and he went there both times, 2005 and 2006. We're doing it again. But he was there to do the story. And he was so excited about seeing this
Like
black
a
town.
kid, like a kid, you know.
Yes, you know, he was just, and he called me 2 days, I think it was Tuesday, Chauncey called me, and said, it's about time for your event again. He was going to do a story on Allensworth. Again. And also he asked me about our speech. He said, I want you to know, he said, Eddie, I respect you. You've been in the community. How are we doing on our TV? What can you offer us to make it better? You know, and he was always inquisitive, trying to make things better.
He was.
I'm sure going to miss Chauncey. I mean, the community. I mean, it was such a great loss. I mean, really, you know.
It really is, because he really cared about the community, and he had such a quality of writing. And the way he approached the story, and as somebody else also said in the earlier show, part of this program, he was able to connect everything together.
Yes.
See, that's very difficult. You have to have a vision to see something happening in East Oakland and what its impact is on West Oakland.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so that's a great talent.
Right, right.
And a gift. Well, what personally then did Chauncey mean to you as a human being? I mean, how did he change your life, or your vision of yourself, or the things you were working on? You know, how did he change your attitude in the black community as well?
Well, I tell you what Chauncey did for me, it's so often it's easy to say, as we see blight in black community, we can say, we can start throwing blame. We can lay it at, you know, this door or that door or this door. But when Chauncey interviewed you and when he talked to you, you knew you had the answer in perspective. If you had a belief in something, that belief had to encompass all. In other words, you couldn't go in there one-sided. You know what I mean? You couldn't go at him one-sided because he was a number one. First, he was a newspaper person.
Yes.
He was a fair writer who happened to be an African American.
Right.
And he served notice on you. Just by the way he started out, the way he started to ask you questions, you knew you had to dance right.
Well, the main thing is, of course, he was about the fairness doctrine that we've lost from the FCC, and that is you give both sides of the story, and you do it fairly and squarely, and that's what his greatest gift to journalism was.
Yeah.
And we were very lucky to have him.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank both of you very much for being with us this evening to remember Chauncey Bailey, and I know the community knows and what a jewel we had and what a jewel we lost, but we know that his spirit will live. Thank you so much for joining us.